Hey there, welcome to episode 95 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo. We're recording this at 3:12 in the morning of Wednesday, September 3rd, 2025. We release audio episodes on Wednesdays, so that works out nicely. Today's title and topic, all-nighters. So, somewhat appropriate to be recording this at this hour. If you are not familiar with the Quaggling Sand audio program, this is essentially audio essays, stories, tales, recollections. They may be useful. There may be some sort of a take-home lesson. Hopefully this particular episode may do that. Rarely, probably never going to have guests, so it will probably always be just me telling these stories. So far, 95 of them. Sometimes they overlap. I don't know that I've repeated too much, but everything is intertwined, so that's okay if they do cross paths a little bit. If you're not familiar with the technical term quaggling sand, you may use the more common layperson term pins and needles for the sensation one feels when circulation is returning to what's probably a limb, a foot, a leg, an arm, a hand. Perhaps you were sleeping on it, sitting on it, had gone numb. So when the numbness fades and sensation returns, quaggling sand. It's a term I coined when I was very young. I think, let's say 5, could be younger. Who can really say? Hopefully wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains show notes, including a brief summary. Looks like one sentence here. And the episode links. I have 4 links. I'm continuing to sort of see where they should land, but including the new homepage link. So we'll get to that in a moment. And when I say hopefully wherever you found this audio program, there are more places to find it. We'll touch on that in a moment. So on that note, the summary of today's episode, I have spoken before about my odd sleep schedule and of course about my winding career path, but every once in a while these have collided for reasons that are ultimately disappointing, but oh so important at the time. The links for today's episode: buy Dan a coffee if you like, if you want. No obligation to spend any money. buymeacoffee.com/danhugo does have a profile page. Come to think of it, I should change that Buy Dan a coffee thing, so it's less suggestive and more indicative that the main takeaway is the profile page with links to all of my programming. In fact, I'm going to change that right now. Profile page with links. Profile page linking everything. How about that? Too lofty. buyDanaCoffee.com/DanHugo, freeform profile page. So I've used it for years as a sort of an anchor. I don't have to maintain the site, so it's always an out-of-band reference to all the stuff I'm working on. So I can instead of one of those link tree type things, this is a little bit more freeform. You'll find some affiliate links if you want for coffees that I actually drink. There will be links to all of my audio programs, including Innovate for Vegas, which is not mine per se, but I produce it, and various projects I'm working on and so on. So everything on there is stuff that I use or stuff that I am working on. It's all about me. Again, no particular obligation to spend any money there, but if you do, I'll go towards all of these. Buy Me an Update was exclusively published at buymeacoffee.com/danhugo/posts, but it is now available also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts. It has an RSS feed externally. There's a YouTube podcast channel. I found that getting my production out far and wide is better than having exclusivity on the Buy Me a Coffee platform. So you can find it first at buymeacoffee.com/danhugo/posts. A 5-minute or less brief update published on Monday mornings about the previous week's audio programs and any news and announcements upcoming. Coffee Solo, ko-fi.com/danhugo/posts is where you will formerly exclusively find the Coffee Solo audio program. No schedule, no topic, no subject focus, no topic focus. Just about whatever, published whenever. Just me talking about whatever's going on at the time and so on. Can't really get into more detail than that. I never know for sure what it's going to be until I start it up. Coffee Solo similarly available in all those other places, and links to both of these and more at the buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo profile page. And finally, all of my audio programs do have an independent web presence of some sort. For the Quaggling Sand audio program you're listening to now, you can visit the quagglingsand.com website. As I'm speaking at this moment, it is particularly Spartan, but it is functional. So the underlying behind-the-scenes stuff is all configured. Now I just have to be creative, which, if you know me, you know is not... I don't have creativity when it comes to aesthetic website design. More functional over attractive. I think you might agree. Quagglingsand.com, and that will always have, just kind of like the buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo profile page, it will have links relevant to the things I'm working on, leaning towards Quaggling Sand, as I get that sort of a little bit more polished. So quagglingsand.com. By the way, Buy Me an Update and Coffee Solo are linked from the danhugo.com site, but I'll have links in the appropriate place for that. And those are all also on the buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo profile page. Okay, enough about that. And by the way, the YouTube channel, it sometimes will take the upload from the RSS feed, which you can do too, and it will convert it to a single frame video so you can listen, or if you really want to watch one frame, the cover art for the episode, you can play it on your TV or whatever. And then YouTube will mark it private sometime later. So if you see an episode that suddenly disappears, it will reappear when I notice. I need to automate that checking and correction. I don't know what's going on. Apparently this has been an issue for months and months, maybe even years, from the comments I've read on the internets. So on that note, let's get this started so we can be finished before the sun rises. So the all-nighter, an introduction. Hopefully we all know what an all-nighter is. The story begins. I've always had an odd sleep schedule since I was in low single digits of years. But I do have to say that the number of times I stayed awake for, say, 24 hours before I headed off to college could probably be counted on one hand. I did through high school, wake up extra early to catch David Letterman, which I had taped from the night before. Remember the old VCR? And catch a city bus after doing my homework to school in the morning. Not an all-nighter, but an unusual adaptive schedule, we could say. Once I arrived at Harvey Mudd College in Claremont, California, I would say fairly early on, but not immediately, I began to adopt a later night schedule, and our days were always filled to the brim with nerdy learning and stuff. So the days were long and the pace was quick. Mudd was generally fast-moving, but not necessarily high stress, not low stress either, but this was probably owed somewhat to the lax regulation of weekend entertainment vis-a-vis parties, loud music. Loud music could take place anywhere and anytime, and really so could parties. The odd party would spring up out of nowhere, a pop-up now and then, small scale, but the parties could be huge. Fundraisers and general diversion from the busy schedules otherwise. So these were general decompression. The take-home lesson at the time was we work hard and we play hard, or some silliness like that. This continued my sliding schedule. So all throughout college, there was more and more deviation from some normal, sleeping. At some point in my first year at college, I realized that staying awake through the night before a midterm made studying easier. I was not cramming, rather I was reviewing, recalling, and reconciling what I knew for the upcoming test, taking a break now and then, getting back to it. This was not practical at all, in the slightest, for finals week. I couldn't stay up for 5 days at the time. But in general, this transition would lead to my receiving the Most Likely to Be Awake award, where I lived in West Dorm. I think I also received Most Likely to Be Wandering the Halls at 3 a.m. Same idea. The Silicon Valley on-ramp. Eventually, I would take a job in Silicon Valley. When I moved to Silicon Valley to work at Supermac Technologies, our work days were pretty normal. And I was actually being paid hourly as a temporary employee, which is going to be important later, making the big dollars. I think it was $15 an hour, I believe there was one evening where several of us stayed late. Our manager brought some food in, I think it was, to keep us distracted from the crazy time. I think the crazy time being like 10 p.m. or something. The building was essentially empty, though, so we were the only ones there. And he thanked us all for the effort and headed home, which is something of a theme for this episode. The underappreciation of those who do put in those all-nighter hours. I have gone through my employment journey in Silicon Valley in a previous episode or 2 or 3, so none of this is particularly new. So here I will skim through some of the skim over, some of the non-applicable parts, some of the jobs that were not particularly noteworthy. Since all-nighters were not as common as they could have been, they were probably more common than it will sound like here in this audio program, so somewhere in the middle. Once I was laid off from Supermac, remember temporary employee, it was right there in the name, I would take the 2-week temporary gig at Storm Technologies, which I've surely described before. It was a little weird. Then I would get my first contractor gig at Apple Computer, the company for which I always wanted to work, working through Audia. I think it was Audia Personnel Services, something like that. Audia, ADIA, I don't think they exist anymore. The Apple on-site contract agency. So it was a third party that managed their contract, and Apple had tons of contractors. This meant 40-hour work weeks. Being paid hourly meant overtime was paid at overtime rates, which was sometimes nice, but very rare. Regular Apple employees were known for getting worked over a bit with demands from on high. I did not work there when Steve Jobs worked there, by the way. So Spindler was one of the CEOs when I was there. But contractors were encouraged to not go over the overtime limits. They actually cared about our work-life balance. No, I'm just kidding. Time and a half is time and a half. Get an employee to do it. We don't have to pay them extra. I have a feeling it was this sort of constrained workplace that sort of drove me away. I did interview for a few different regular employee positions at Apple. Knowing what I knew, I still tried to get a full-time job there. But we had just come out of the Bush 41 recession, and yet for some reason they wanted more experience than I had at the time. And so the change, I think I worked there for just over a year, and then it was on to something else. True Vision, in fact. When I actually joined, it was Raster Ops. I think I talked about that previously. I would become an employee at True Vision eventually, but I joined as an independent consultant, a 1099 worker, if you like. So there were no overtime constraints to worry about, and True Vision had plenty to do. True Vision was acquiring Raster Ops, so may as well say True Vision. At some point, my interactions with the engineering group, and I was brought in to do some technical QA testing. So I was not an engineer to start, but and while at the time I felt this was a trap I was falling into, the so-called pigeonhole, oh, you're just a tester, which I've talked about previously. This was actually a great experience. I was seated in the engineering group. My cubicle was right in the middle of all of that, so I was interacting with them all the time. And it's almost like I was an engineer too. I was spending more and more time in the lab on the new products, the Target 2000, the venerable Target 2000. At some point, I was invited to head to Japan with the SVP, Senior Vice President of Asian Pacific Sales, Ron, to meet with Sony about a collaboration. I had 30 days from the time I was told, hey, do you want to go to Japan? I had 30 days to get some code working on the Target 2000 hardware we made so that it would be it would function the way Sony wanted to use it in their particular application. It was not a usual implementation of our hardware and software. And this was a completely new way that needed some serious hackery. So I had 30 days to do that. On top of getting an expedited passport sorted, I had never traveled outside the country to date. Boy, did that change later. Getting that sorted and obtaining some wardrobe appropriate for business meetings in Japan. I didn't have a tie of utility at the time, so got some clothes. Brought too many clothes for my trip. I was coding away otherwise. Long days to be sure. I don't remember all-nighters during this 30 days, but I also don't remember taking much in the way of breaks. We had a lot to do, and with so much to do, you can't really do anything but. The real schedule of flips and flops came with the actual trip to Japan, which was to be about 6 days from departure to return, obviously in a different time zone. My first trip out of the country. It was a lot of firsts here, working not only on the Sony site for not a website, but an actual physical plant in Atsugi, I think it was. So we were at the Sony site for a full day, literally from morning till we all went out to dinner, probably got back to the hotel around midnight. So it was a full day, but also joining the SVP, that was Ron, on some other meetings through the week. These were very long days with a lot of trains and taxis. And remember, we're jet lagged and not really a lot of time to resync our clocks. Working not only in the Sony site, but everywhere we were bouncing around, a lot of not knowing where I was or when, really. And we both, Ron and myself, relied entirely on his interpretive business consultant who spoke Japanese and who was basically in Japan a lot, to make sense of the wheres and the whens, and of course the hows to get from here to there. I believe when I returned home, then got on a plane immediately to head to Phoenix for a post-graduation gathering at my parents' house, I slept for 12 hours, which was unusual for me at the time, to almost catch up and reset my internal clock, thus the introduction to workday turmoil in the tech age. Later, I would work for SCM Microsystems. That was I was headed to Japan for the first time. That was interesting for True Vision, but that was working for an American company. SCM Microsystems was a German company with an American subsidiary in Los Gatos, California. So we were beholden to the CEO in Munich with most of the core engineering team in Erfurt, which is a city in what was East Germany. Now it's just Germany. Not to mention the team in La Ciotat on the Mediterranean coast of France. So it was between Marseille and Cannes, if you're looking on a map. The hotel I stayed in had 2 guests, myself and my colleague from Erfurt. My bed faced a sliding glass door window that looked out onto the Mediterranean. It was not awful. So we were working with a couple of time zones, and while they often made accommodations on the European side, this, by the way, that was a little foreshadowing for my trip to France. Getting ahead of myself. So we were working with a couple of time zones, and while they often made accommodations on the European side for our time zone in California, you'll find this to be true generally. People say, oh, the Americans always want their time zone. There were occasions where we had to speak on their schedule, so it was all over the place, really. I would eventually head to La Ciotat. Hey, look, it happened. To hang out with the French team to learn all about smart cards, which was the emerging technology goal for the company. I think this was a full week. It may have been slightly longer, 6 days maybe. And it was just prior to Easter that year, which meant the entire town of La Ciotat was nearly empty. Europe goes on vacation after Easter with better weather, so not only was I on a new time zone for the second time, I really hadn't done much international traveling since Japan, working a normal workday there, but I was having meetings with my colleagues in the US to review what I was learning, since I was also something of a spy checking out the French team. So that is having a look at what was going on, since the French team was fairly autonomous and was the main IP hub for the company pursuits of chip cards or smart cards. There was I don't know if this will make sense, but the German people were concerned that the French people were not telling them everything. Who knew? That's all joke, but there really was a sort of weird communication, and trying to figure out what was going on was part of the task at hand. Once I returned to the U.S., I had better relations with the French team, and since I had been joined for the time I was there by one colleague from the Erfurt team, and the Erfurt team was very tight. They had known each other. They basically grew up with this company. I got to know the rest of the Erfurt team over time through him, and then a couple of them would visit the US and so on. This was something of an introduction to having working and even friendly relations in the work context across time zones, which is deceptively interesting because it becomes easier to extend meeting times and thus work days into work nights and more waking hours, which for a salaried employee, which I was for them, and more often than not at this point, no, the days of contracting were not, or contracting or hourly, let's say working per hour, had faded a bit. And to be honest, that was not a great idea. Means giving more time to the company. Oh, hey, yeah, I can have a meeting at 3 a.m. with the German team. Why not? Now, I will say I usually would volunteer for that. If I was running my own schedule, that would happen at Intel. But it is something to be aware of that. Oh, I know the people in Shanghai. I know the Singapore team. I know the Cork team. I know the team down in Brazil. Yeah, sure. Well, Brazil's in our time zone mostly. But yeah, as you become acquainted with and have more dealings with people in other time zones, you tend to either want to or need to extend your usable workday. And doesn't always mean they just got to pay you more money in general. You're not going to get the big bonus or anything. Not just from that work. Maybe from some sort of result, some outcome. Oh man, I'm glad I worked those extra 1,000 hours. Eventually I would land at Netscape, of course. I departed SCM Microsystems because it was a bit too challenging for me at the point in my career to deal with the international politics inside the company. Netscape was basically working entirely in one building. They had several buildings, but the engineering group I was in, pretty much in one building on Middlefield. I can't remember if they called it Middlefield 1 or something. Netscape 1, whatever it was. It's fairly common with my early job arrangements, as was the case here. The commute was easy. Only when I worked at Salon did I have a ridiculous commute. Most of the time my commute was somewhere in the 5 miles or less. That's really a commentary on how many companies existed in Silicon Valley and where you could work. I think this one was about 4 miles, which would be extra convenient for on a couple of occasions, for better or worse. Netscape had poured a ton of money into making food and snacks available all the time. This was common back in those days, including kitchenettes, multiple kitchenettes per area, per floor. They were everywhere. From my cube, we moved around a little bit inside the building. But no matter, I think I was in about 3 different places at some point. The walk to the nearest kitchenette was it was closer than the bathroom usually. It was that important to have free snacks and beverages at all times. So they had the traditional, or sort of infamous at this point, glass front refrigerators, always stocked with Mountain Dew and other soft drinks. Plenty of Mountain Dew, though, lots of caffeine allegedly. Junk food of various kinds. I remember we had muffins from some local muffin purveyor, so those were always in baskets. Other snacks. And commercial espresso machines in every kitchenette, like every single one. Add a laundry service, an on-site concierge that could take care of a variety of needs like errands and whatnot. There was no reason to leave. And that's one of those traps that's so easy to fall into. I believe there were very few late nights. There were very few late nights, very late nights. But the entire engineering building tended to be an all-nighter itself, with one of my colleagues preferring to come in to work in the evenings, working through to the morning. So really, everybody was on their own schedule. We did have team meetings that I guess you were supposed to try to sort of be at, whatever that core time was. And that coworker's name was Tom. I think he would show up for those, but that was probably a little bit early in his day. I myself had one occasion, and this was rare, but so mostly it was long days, but not all-nighters. But I did have an occasion where I spent 2 or 3 days, I think it was 3 days, straight getting some components working and integrated into something we had been working on. With our torturous build system, everything took a long time back in those those slower compute days by comparison today. Kids today just have no idea. Only heading home to get a shower and then head back to work. So I didn't really leave. I took a break to take a shower, change clothes, and go back to work. So not actually closing my eyes or anything useful like that. Was it worth it? Probably not. This is where I began to learn that lesson about how lack of sleep probably adds issues rather than solving them. Why did I make that mistake? I must have been in a dream state. Eventually our whole group would get laid off at Netscape, so I left early, but I left before the layoffs became apparent, so it was kind of an uncomfortable departure, but it is what it was. UMax Computer Corporation was my destination, an opportunity to get in on a pre-IPO tech company. I joined Netscape after they went public. I was actually working at TrueVision when they went public, and I remember the morning we were all talking about the Netscape IPO, how crazy it was. UMax started out as a Mac clone company and ended up as a preferred Intel partner making x86 or traditional Intel microprocessor machines. An interesting journey just in that transition. Fix a typo. Just in that transition, but we always had long days there. They were just always long. Our time working with Apple on clone designs was always a challenge because Apple was rarely as helpful as they could be when it came to getting some clarification regarding some of their secret inner workings that we needed sometimes to better understand. Hey, you can clone our designs, but we're going to give you a secret package and you just stick it in your computer, put the wires on, and then don't ask any questions. Later in our timeline, Intel would prove to be far more helpful in general. Anybody who's familiar with the yellow books, back in the old days, we had nothing. We were like the first company to get the slot 1 Pentiums. We had the yellow books. We had a FAE, Eric. We had a marketing person. We had funding for promote. We had all kinds of stuff. Intel was very helpful. Look where it got them. Apple's like one of the wealthiest companies on the planet, and Intel is Intel. And I worked for both. On one such occasion, we were to develop an upgrade card for so this was in the Mac days, for a new processor with some backside cache memory. Nowadays, this is commonplace, but this was a new thing back then. We needed to enable that cache memory during boot time when you turned your computer on or rebooted it, reset it, which we had no access to in the Apple clone design. We couldn't mess with stuff during boot time. The challenge, which took me 4 days to reverse engineer, ultimately resulted in a functional, even productizable implementation that enabled our upgrade. So it would pass the Apple qualification tests. They could actually boot it up with it was called an init at the time. It was code that would run after reset, but during system boot. If you're an old Mac person, you would see the inits, the little icons showing up at the bottom of the screen. Those kind of went away, but it was init time patching of, or actually probing. So it did patch some things. But anyway, so some magic took place and we were able to pass the qualification. The challenge, which did take me 4 days, though, required a lot of being awake. So I spent all that time, we got it working, and in the end, we just moved away from Mac clone business anyway. So it was a learning experience, but ultimately got me nothing. I stayed awake for days and did all manner of hackery to get this thing working, basically, for nothing. Like I just said, hey, I'm getting ahead of myself again. Yes, it was educational, and it will always have this story, I suppose. But there was no real ROI for this. When we transitioned to Intel designs, which required a big layoff and restructuring of our little company, which was a completely different bit of chaos, boy, howdy, is it fun when the company counsel says, oh yeah, the person you're working for is going to get laid off, but don't tell him. I would not do that again. Just keep it to yourself. There was a rather substantial learning curve to go along with this, so we all had to learn how Intel systems work and whatnot, and there were fewer of us. No all-nighters for this phase of it, but nonstop working anyway with our 3-person team, focused specifically on bringing up what would be two new designs, one single and one dual slot 1 processor motherboard and corresponding BIOS and other necessary developments. Our company shut down before we ever shipped these, even though they worked great and got A+ grades from the Intel headmasters, and they were actually impressed. Like, oh, you guys just started designing Intel parts or Intel hardware, boards to work with Intel hardware. There you go. So they were impressed, and it was a good a good relationship at our level, but apparently UMAX in the US just did not have the future that we were thinking. So much effort for what amounted to nothing, including our incentive stock options going out the window. We never did get any sort of, well, we got nothing. Chasing stock options for a company you don't have any control over. Another lesson learned. I worked at Philips Components after that, for better or worse. So there was like a big chunk of time right in the middle of my Silicon Valley and tech career experiences where I was taking these roles that required far too much personal investment. For better or worse, most of the Intel phase survivors from UMAX would land at Philips as a package deal, like a big group hire. Our exciting path was leading us to flat display systems productization, if I could spell that correctly. Productization, also known as LCD screen products. Now, at the time, everybody has an LCD now, but at the time, this was still pretty new. Philips was just launching the first consumer LCD television for $15,000. And I think it was a 43? I think it was a 43 inch. Maybe it was less. It was super thick. No, none of this thin, no bezel, flat displays today. This was a substantial piece of hardware. And I want to say it was 43 inches. I could be wrong. It was not that big though. 43 inches is kind of big, but for the price, $15,000? No. The first four of us to move over literally got on a plane to Eindhoven, Holland, and then to Red Hill, England, on the same trip on our second day with the company to the NAT Lab in Eindhoven, the Torenkundig Laboratorium. It's where they were doing some of their R&D in Eindhoven. Philips actually had a lot of research going on, which was kind of interesting, where we met with our Dutch team that had developed the LCD controller product that was in use for some customers, including Nokia, as they used to call it, Nokia. Philips used to make all of the displays for the 6100 series mobile phone for Nokia also. So that was 1 million displays per week. Remember when only that many cell phones of a particular model were being sold? But they were going to be replaced, the product and the team, though they didn't know that yet, which is always kind of weird. Remember that talking to corporate counsel? Yeah, it gets worse. The team at Philips Research Labs in Red Hill, and this was in the south of England, were north of Brighton, yeah, I think that's where I was, were pure scientists working on the next steps in glass display technology. So they were all like semiconductor engineers. So they were working with real silicon to make glass electronics, essentially. I would make more trips to Eindhoven and Red Hill during my time with Philips, which was yet more inter-time zone travel and engagement with our internal partners, also international partners. So I was always on a weird schedule. This was a trend I was on for a while. We were developing the next generation LCD controller back in San Jose, where we were, a controller board to replace the one from the Eindhoven team, so we could replace the team and their product. How cool were we? Which meant our UMAX cohort had to learn everything there was to know about VESA timings. This is back in the analog display days. There was no HDMI connectors. This was all HD15 for the win. And analog to digital conversion and color matching and so on, which, hey, some of us had done at Supermac, my very first job out of college way back when. So the Supermac was 1993. We were working at Philips in 1999. So quite a journey in these 6 years for my first tour at Silicon Valley. Analog to digital conversions to get those analog signals off that HD15 connector from your whatever graphics card you had, and image scaling and sub-pixel color adjustments and whatnot. We needed our new product to work yesterday, of course. Everything is always late, so give it to the engineering people and they'll fix it. I was very rarely out of the lab before 9 p.m. every single day, 9 p.m. or so. Could have been 10. Lived fairly close by, so the commute home and back to work the next day was not bad at all, really. Another 5-6 miles, pretty typical for my first tour of Silicon Valley. And there were a couple of later nights than that, not to mention a 4-day push. I don't know why everything takes 4 days. 3 or 4 days is the thing. That had me going loopy to get the final version working for some qualification testing of some sort. So I I had a 4-day, like I was in the lab all the time. I would go home, take a shower, go back to work. So once again, not closing my eyes so much for the 4 days for the good of the company. So it ended up working. Everything, hey, okay, neat. We mission accomplished. But come to think of it, there were no stock options, no bonuses, just a lot of work for some questionable deadline that ultimately led nowhere. The group got shut down. The product never shipped, all that. So, one product did ship, one did not. Again, later I would work at Palm. This was my second tour of Silicon Valley. So we jumped ahead a bit. I joined Palm based on one of my colleagues from the Newton group at Apple so many years earlier. So I joined the QA test group. He was a QA manager, not a real engineer. And by the way, I've never really appreciated that when people call themselves an engineer. Oh yeah, I'm a QA engineer. I'm a design engineer. Well, no, you're not. Anyway, so the person I was working for, not a good manager at all. Better at managing up. I've talked about this previously. So I joined the QA test group, but as usual, I made the role my own based on what they actually needed to get this brand new phone, the Palm Pre, out the door anywhere near on time. They were kind of betting the whole company on it. Do you see Palm around today? Not quite an all-nighter, but I did work the first 30 days in a row, weekends included, with 10-plus hour days, the norm. There would be a lot of very long days that bordered on all-nighters, but 4 in the morning. At one point, I suggested that I wanted to work less, so I was trying to automate more of what we needed to do. Someone complained about this. They said that I was slacking, or, oh, he's complaining about working. When you work with children, I suppose. My response, I would like to not be here at 4 in the morning. If that upsets you, that's your problem. When I say work less, I mean normal work days. That would be nice. We're not getting paid to work the other 24 hours a day, just the first 24. At some point, this automation path led me to being a part of an emergency tiger team of sorts, trying to figure out why some of our test devices were failing. We had a very limited number of functional devices with different hardware configurations, and we started to see a pattern. A particular flash memory part that was in the devices that would fail had become apparent. But we didn't know that initially. We just knew, we're about to ship this phone and it starts breaking. Like it just dies. That's no good. That's kind of a company killer. This brought us back to nearly all-nighters. I think because I lived walking distance from home, that staying all night was not really necessary. So it was super quick to come into work. I think one time I did come in at some weird hour because someone, hey, are you around? Can you come in? Sometimes it's not good to live too close to work. Make sure everybody knows, oh, he's got to actually go up a mountain both ways to get here. Ultimately, we identified the root cause of the problems we had observed. For my trouble, and there was a lot of troubles. We had some innovative notions that we implemented to find and sort of characterize and so on the whole, and to verify the fixes and whatnot. It was as an engineering exercise. It was I'll say it was fun and it was educational, and that's how engineers get roped into this stuff. Like, hey, you get to play with the latest. Oh, okay, I will double the amount of hours I'm spending on this and not get compensated. I received a tiny little bonus, and they were not handing out bonuses because Palm was not doing well. They were not in a good way. They had placed everything on this phone. So I got a tiny little bonus that amounted to maybe $50 for each of the crazy non-normal hours I had worked, probably less. So I can't say that it wasn't a new day thanks to that bonus, but I guess it was some sort of token appreciation. But far worse than this, that I actually, I'm not trying to say that I didn't appreciate the bonus, but it was like, it wasn't much for the effort that I had put in. But worse than this, as we moved to the next product, the Palm Pixie, I don't think they ever saw the light of day. Actually, my manager, remember the guy from the Newton group, raised expectations. He wanted me to do yet more and used my previous accomplishments against me, if you can imagine that. He literally said, that was then. What are you doing now? What have you done for me lately? As Miss Jackson might say. That was a cue to me to depart. Much later, and of course I was in Vegas, You can fast forward to my working for Intel Corporation after I relocated to Las Vegas in the Maker Innovator Group, which was a brand new group. The deal, I would remain in Vegas. So I moved to Vegas, and then I was approached by a former Palm colleague. Small world. I would remain in Vegas, the only employee of Intel Corporation in the state of Nevada, which was noteworthy for the time, and not receiving what they called the geo bump. This would be to account for the substantial difference in cost of living in Silicon Valley had I moved back there, which I knew all too well. At the time, I literally said, rent was 3 times what I'm paying here in Vegas. Are you going to pay me 3 times more? And I said, basically, they wanted me to travel all the time. So I said, why would I spend 3 times the rent for never being home? And they said, yeah, that's reasonable. Since I would be traveling so much, I said this was indeed the case, as it turns out. So beginning with my first trip to Ireland to meet the Irish team that had developed the first product in our portfolio, the Galileo MakerBoard. So in the end, my negotiated agreement was I ended up making the same amount of money per year that I was making in Silicon Valley, but in Las Vegas. So I didn't get the geo bump, and I was traveling all the time. So when I say I was making the same amount of money in Silicon Valley, I was making the same amount of money in Silicon Valley from many years earlier. But to me, given the difference in cost of living, that seemed reasonable. So I wasn't getting wealthy or anything, but I also was traveling the world. So at the end of the day, the Intel deal was not awful. It was probably the best deal of any of the jobs I've held for other companies. A substantial part of my role was to participate as a mentor, so helping people, a helpful representative of the company capitalized, at various hackathon events, where these events would sometimes span 48 continuous hours, sometimes longer. And maybe as a point of pride, but also it was usually helpful to be able to be around because good ideas sometimes happen at the strangest times. So I did get a certain amount of street cred for being awake with everybody. So, oh yeah, he was here the whole time. At that point, by this time, staying awake for 48 hours and doing technical work, programming and hardware hackery and whatnot was pretty straightforward. It was not too crazy. Waking ingenuity by college students or a variety of different kinds of creative people. That was what I was experiencing. It was kind of fun. This and my being on 100 or more airplanes each year, traveling a lot, phone meetings at all hours across time zones. We had teams all around the world. We were Intel. That was back when they had teams all around the world. And 80% or more travel away from home made for a role that was at once grueling and fun. So yeah, it was, as I remarked to one of my former managers who said, I'm surprised you're still working there after whatever, 2 years, a year, whatever it was. So the only reason I'm still at Intel is because I don't have to be at Intel. I did visit Intel buildings occasionally. I spent more time in IR5, basically in Ireland, than any other Intel facility. So that's part of the fun part. Even participation in the Intel reality show, America's Greatest Makers, was not enough to prevent me being caught up in the big layoff. The first of what has turned out to be many in a short period of time. My layoff was 12,000 people. That has happened more than once. If you're a company of 120,000, which it was at the time I was working there, you lay off 12,000 people, then you hire a bunch back, then you lay off 12,000 more. What's going on with this place? Their layoffs have been substantial for all the waking hours and effort I had put into this one, and unceremonious. And as I joined my 12,000 or so colleagues at the time, walking out the exit. Nothing to show for it, but maybe some frequent flyer miles and a collection of LinkedIn connections that never respond anyway. And it turns out I was contributing to a retirement fund, so that's nice, I guess. But no pockets full of money or anything. It was an experience, and that is nothing to shake a stick at. But still, that could have been. What could have been. I've cut out a few of these, like I said. The take-home lessons, though, after all of this, and Intel was now a few years ago, but over my 32 years at this point in the business, I think the main takeaway from all of these, and there were more, I hit the highlights here as examples, is to not give so much to companies that will not give it back. All-nighters are for one's own misadventures where the return on the investment is more directly recognized. And to be honest, if you're spending all of your waking hours and even some of your sleeping hours on your business, it's yours and you have some sort of say in what's going on. I had nothing to do with the Intel layoff. Nobody said, damn, what do you think we should do here? They just said, move to California or take the layoff. And I said, I'm not. And by the way, our whole entire group was end of lifed within 6 months after the layoffs. And a lot of people left after that. So I would have relocated to a super expensive part of the country and then have been left to my own devices. So thanks Intel. So full-time or exempt employees may get some sort of benefit, maybe comp time or maybe something in the near term. Maybe there is some equity grant in there to make it somehow worthwhile. And by the way, some of those do pay off. That's where a lot of people did really well in Silicon Valley. I don't know what the ratio was, but it's going to be something less than 100%. So taking a job, putting in all of your blood, sweat, and tears in exchange for ISOs at the time, incentive stock options, and later it's RSUs, something stock units. I can't remember. So it's an equity grant of some sort. Hey, if you work real hard and you maybe take a cut in pay, we're going to give you a piece of the company. So if we all win together, do you see what we're saying? So get back to work. So an equity grant somehow to make it worthwhile. Maybe those all-nighters will result in a product shipping or a service working. And because of this sort of dedicated effort, everybody wins. If that winning doesn't really happen, though, what then? And this was, and again, I don't know what the ratio is, but, this was where we worked so hard on this. Oh, well, and then there's always the shutdown party or oh, yeah, remember that time we were here for 28 days straight and we never really got anything for it. Good times. Working for a company of some kind usually makes for substantial asymmetry, as it turns out, in this regard. No matter how nice the coworkers, how fun the job, how much free soda they have in their refrigerators, hey, they do my laundry for me. The pay and the job are the pay and the job. The time can never be replaced. That lost sleep is just lost. And at some point, the rewards for this sacrifice pushed into the future may not materialize. That was a lesson I learned many times. Then what? The real takeaway from these lessons: spend that extra time on things that are yours, or mine, in my version of all of this. My startup, my project, sure, spend my time, hope my efforts return something for me, and maybe others. Giving extra time to a company is usually a wager. And if there is one thing we know here in Vegas, the house does not build new resorts and casinos by paying out on wagers. Boy, howdy, is that the truth. So yeah, that's the story of all-nighters. Too much time and dedication given. And I say, oh, but you're getting paid. If you're a full-time employee, you are trading your time for money. So if I'm receiving, let's pick a number. If I'm receiving, let's round it to 2,000. So if I'm receiving $50,000 a year, that's $50,000 for 2,080 hours, technically, 2,000 hours of full-time employment in a year. So if you're exempt, that means you aren't eligible for overtime. So if I work 2,080, but we'll just say 2,000 hours for $50,000 a year, I am making $25 an hour. Pretty cool. But what if I start working like an extra 10 hours a week? That's now 500 extra hours per year, right? 52 hours times 10 is 520 hours. Am I doing that right? It is 4 a.m. So 52 times 10 times 10. I'm only checking, 520. I don't want to be later going like, it was 5,200. No, so 520 hours if you work. So you've got 2,080 hours. So we've rounded to 2,000. So now we're doing an extra 5, just from 10 hours a week. That's an extra 10 hours every week for all year. That's an extra 500 hours. But am I getting an extra 25 times 520 hours? which should be a bonus of $13,000. So $50,000 plus $13,000, that's like 25%. But no, you don't really get that. You never get that. A wise person once told me, you should be in sales. Because in sales, you get, if you work extra hard and you make more sales, you usually get more commissions or somehow whatever your business arrangement is on that, but you get a piece of the thing. Now you're not exchanging time for money. You're exchanging your effort for money. So the thing about time for money, just like so in my example, I cannot do, well, this is the old days. I can't do two jobs at the same time. So if I spend 2,000 or then, 2,080 plus another 520, so that's 2,600 hours a year on a job, but I get a fixed salary and I'm not eligible for overtime, my pay rate has gone down and I can never multiplex. I can never multiply. I can never scale that up. So I'm pretty much stuck. So it took me a while to learn this the hard way, I guess you could say. And I just kept relearning it. But if you're working for another company and you are on a salary, then that's it. There is no, the nice thing about working on commission is you can have two customers. And if you spend the time getting a third customer, now you have three customers that are buying products and you're getting commission on them. You aren't serializing them. They can happen at any time. So at any given time, you have multiple sources of revenue in these commission sales in this example, that are kind of working for you. So engineering turns out to be a kind of a scam. Like, oh, we can just pay them a lot of money. We'll offer them a ton of, not a lot, but nowadays you get a tremendous amount of money, but guess what? People are not taking the bait. You can read about that with Meta and their super intelligent team, where people are already leaving and have been turning down $100 million job offers, which is insane. Because at some point you realize, engineering, oh, wait, no, I've been tricked like this before. You're going to pay me a ton of money, but it's going to suck. And I'm kind of trapped here and I can't work on other things that I'm interested in and so on. Being a independent, a consultant, individual, like a business owner, external, not an individual contributor as an employee. So if you can have multiple things going on and you can bill for different things at the same time, that's a lawyer standard billing trick. Definitely worth looking into. So the take home is in the roles that I have had working for other companies, at the end of the day, it ends up being kind of a JIP, which I think is a pejorative term, but we'll just keep it as the sort of slang term. Like I'm getting kind of the short end of the deal. At one point, California, because of so much Silicon Valley action, California said that exempt employees should be allowed to make more than minimum wage. Even though you're exempt, you should not have to make less than a minimum wage. So the minimum wage laws should still apply, even if overtime doesn't. It's part of the state labor practices or statutes and whatnot. So for a window of time, and I was actually at Salon at the time, I was not making a ton of money at Salon. They didn't really consider me like a programmer. We were just, it was not a tech company, so they didn't really value technical contribution as much. With all the hours I was spending, I actually at one point said, hey, I would qualify for this special case where people are making less than whatever the minimum wage test that they had as part of this statute. But as I did some research, it turns out, people who make the claim on that, and then the company has to pay treble damages as usual. Like whenever there's a payroll problem for an employee, you're entitled to damages to cover losses and so on. So it's usually treble damages, triple the amount, the difference in pay, whatever. But from what I was finding out, when that happened, people would kind of find out, like, oh, this person's going to complain, don't hire them. So the dollar figure was not worth the reputation damage in my assessment at the time. So yeah, it was kind of like a lot more going into the company than coming out. And some of that was financial, but some of that was other factors. So yeah, don't trade time for money. That's the take home. And don't work all-nighters for someone else. If you're going to be up all night, work on what you want to work on for you. Hopefully it's an investment in your future. That's what I say to myself at 4:12 in the morning, which is the time on the clock. As we come to the end of this episode, my show timer says it's 59 minutes and 10 seconds. With the truncation of silence, I'm going to guess 57 minutes, give or take. Thanks for listening as always. Be sure and check out quagglingsand.com and buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo and find out all the other fun audio programming and more coming that I'm up to. Take care. Bye-bye.